This is a grade 3 science topic called magnets or magnetism, and this is for you to review. So if you had grade 3 science, you would have learned this topic. So remember, in every science investigation, we start with a question. And we have two questions here. Number one, how many different ways can you put these things together? So the things pictured, each thing is part blue and part red. So do those things have a name? And question two, what do the things do when you put them together? So what do they do when you put them together? So following our question, we make a prediction. A prediction is an idea about what will happen after now before we test it. Okay, so what will happen before we put those things together? What do you predict? So if you had this in grade 3, maybe you have an idea. If you didn't learn this in grade 3, then keep listening to this lesson. You can say, I predict the two things will action, whatever the action is, when I put them together. Okay, so after we put them together, the things that were pictured, we actually had them in the class in grade 3, and the students were putting them together in different ways. They shared their observations, so what they saw the things do. And they started their observations with, I observed, that's in the past, I observed that. Okay, and then we talked about how many different ways they put the things together. And we showed that using these pictures. So notice we have arrows here. We've used arrows in science before, for example, in force diagrams and in food chain diagrams, but the arrows for this picture or diagram could mean something different. So that's why we have to label the arrow so that we know what the arrow means. So in grade 3, we talked about our observations, and we learned that those things are called magnets. And magnets have two ends, or two parts, which are called poles. A magnet has a north pole and a south pole. So look at the picture. The N stands for North Pole and the S stands for South Pole. And some of the students already had an idea about the N and the S. They shared that in their predictions. So we learned that the north pole of one magnet attracts the south pole of another magnet. So we show that in the picture. So I see the arrows pointing toward the middle when I look at attract, the green word. We also learn that the north pole of one magnet repels the north pole of another magnet. Okay? Or the south pole of one magnet repels the south pole of another magnet. So look at the pictures with the arrow that shows repel. I see the arrows pointing in opposite directions. They're not pointing toward each other. So what might the word repel mean? What do you think it means? If the two things called magnets repel if you put the same poles together. So we see blue and blue if you tried to put blue and blue together, or red and red together. So we learn that attract is to pull together and move closer together. So some force was pulling the magnets together when the students were putting the N and the S together. They were attracting, okay, or the S and the N. So we see the position of the force. We call this force magnetic field. Okay, see the X in the middle between the magnets. They're pulling the magnets toward the middle, to that direction. So we know that's a pull force, not a push force. What does repel mean, or repulsion? Repel is to push away and move apart. So here, when you put the kids observed when they tried to put the S and the S together, they felt a force pushing the magnets, these two things, away. Or if they tried to put N and N together, the red parts together, they felt the magnets were pushing away. It was difficult to put them together. We called that repel, okay? And so repel is a push force, and it's the magnetic field is what exerts the push force when you try to put the north poles together or the south poles together. That's repulsion. What is magnetic field? Magnetic field is an invisible force around a magnet that lets magnets push or pull objects without touching them. So these are the different ways we learned that you can put magnets together. Okay, we talked about what happens. We drew the diagram in grade 3, but if you're in grade 5, this is just review for you. So we recorded our results on a table. So for A, North Pole and South Pole, we said we put a tick mark under attract and an X under repel because North and South attract. What about South and North? Do they attract or repel? What about letter C, North and North? What about South and South? So we're talking about the poles here, the ends of the magnet. Do you know? Okay, so here you can check yourself. Right here it shows North and South attract, South and North attract, but North and North do not attract. They repel. South and South do not attract. They also repel. So fill in the gap. The blank pole of one magnet attracts the blank pole of another magnet. The blank pole of one magnet repels the blank pole of another magnet. The blank pole of one magnet repels the south pole of another magnet. Blank poles do what to one another? Blank poles do what to one another? So we learned from our observations and our discussions that the north pole of one magnet attracts the south pole of another magnet. The north pole of one magnet repels the north pole of another magnet. The south pole of one magnet repels the south pole of another magnet. So, like poles repel one another. So what do we mean by like poles? Like means the same. Okay? Unlike poles attract one another. What do we mean by unlike poles? Unlike means different or opposite. Poles attract one another. So we acted out attraction and repulsion in class. So one person represented the magnet. Actually, two people in a group represented a magnet. So we had two magnets. And then we had a person who represented the invisible force, magnetic field. So we wrote a conclusion with using these words from my results. I have concluded that, and concluded all that means is what have you learned from the tests, from your results. And we used the words magnet, north pole, south pole, unlike poles, attract, pull together, like poles, repel, push away, magnetic field. So if you can use all of these words to talk about magnets, then that you are prepared for the checkpoint, the part about magnetism. And then our second question was what happens when you put a magnet on another object, so the other object is not a magnet. And our students made predictions about that. These are some of the objects that we tested. So for example, what will happen if you try to put a magnet on a copper coin or a pencil or a paper clip or aluminum foil? What will happen? Okay, so we made predictions. We have materials and objects. So material is what the object is made of. Object is the thing that we use. Okay, so rubber is the material. You can use rubber to make many different things. Okay, but the specific thing we are talking about is a rubber eraser. So our students predicted whether or not it would be attracted to a magnet. And then they recorded their results, and then they classified the material and object as magnetic or non-magnetic. So what do you think? All right, and so here were our results with attraction, and then for every material and object that resulted in no, we classified that as non-magnetic, and for everything that was attracted to a magnet, we said yes and classified that as magnetic. More observations. So what do we mean magnetic? Magnetic describes materials that a magnet attracts. Some, not all metals, like the ones in the picture, are attracted to magnets. So we have metal, which is a material, like iron, nickel, cobalt, and steel. Those metals are attracted to magnets. Non-magnetic describes materials that a magnet does not attract. So examples of non-magnetic materials include paper, glass, plastic, rubber, wood, and some metals, for example, aluminum and copper. Some metals are not attracted to magnets, okay? So all we learned when we learned about circuits and electricity, we learned that all metals can conduct electricity, okay? But not all metals are magnetic. So when you study and describe objects and materials, or I should say materials that are magnetic or non-magnetic, you can say out loud, I observed the magnet attracted the steel scissors, so the steel scissors are magnetic. Or you can say, I observed the magnet did not attract a copper coin, so the copper coin is non-magnetic. So you can, when you classify the different materials and objects, you can use these sentences to help you study. So what happens when you put a magnet on other objects? So if you can answer this question in a conclusion using all of the blue words and the red words, which are actions, then you know this information. And these are extra slides, other activities, other questions to extend your thinking. And this is extra information about American coins and the metals that they're made of. They're mixed, they're actually mixed metals. And just this slide, it prompts you to think of other ways magnets are used in everyday life. And this is extra information. And this is an activity you could do at home if you'd like to try it. And I hope this helped you review the science topic of magnets.